Hey man, you like explosions? But welcome in, welcome in. I do usually tend to yap when I go through the officials, but for the sake of switching platforms now, I'm just gonna go through the officials and I'm gonna make separate videos for all the shit that I want to yap about. But I'm not gonna waste any more of your time. We're going to go through the officials. Chapter 333, Natural Born. The chapter starts with the narrator saying, finally, they clash head on. The Japan vs France #1 showdown. Don't miss this moment of ego, as we see the matchup of Rin vs Loki. Rin, copying Sai's move from the U20 match, manages to nutmeg Loki and dash past him. Loki, unfazed though, just turns around and begins to sprint, instantly catching up with Rin. This frustrates him. And as Loki manages to get in front of Rin once again, the duel resets. Rin's made it close enough though. He can see it. His shot calls. And as he winds up to make a shot, Loki sees this and runs straight at him. This is what Rin wanted though, to recreate that shot from the PXG game. As Loki connects with him, he shoots. Unfortunately for him though, it was a full recreation because Hugo blocks it. However, this time, Hugo fully blocks it. And as the ball flies over the goal, Rin grits his teeth. The commentator screams, "Gah! So close! Hugo's super block keeps France from conceding a goal." As we see the fans watch on in horror. Somebody else watching on in horror though is Isagi. He says, huh? And as he watches Hugo land, he thinks, for real? Could it be? Even that just now was predicted. Reading Rin's traits of wanting to shoot while colliding, Loki limited the shot course. And Hugo blocked it. No, it's not just that. Tactics that Bluelock prepared, as well as our individual abilities. Everything has been logically understood and grasped. Talents placed in the right place, bringing out an 100% performance. An aptitude-based elite collective. As this starts to overwhelm him, he thinks, Can we win? Against France? Hugo, winning nonchalant dreadhead of the year, stands up and says, you guys are strong, Bluelock. Even if you take the collective-minded culture of Japanese football and mix it with the individualistic philosophy of everyone aiming to be the world's best, you create a hybrid team that takes the best of the collective and the individual. Your coach is an excellent individual who made that experiment a success. But as far as it goes, talent, 66%, environment, 33%, luck, 1%. These are the ratios of elements that decide a match, at least that's what I believe. In Bluelock's case, it's a team that's been barely winning, by Yoichi Isagi pulling in that 1%, right? So we won't let there be a situation where that luck can happen. This is the ultimate way to crush Bluelock. This strikes a nerve with Isagi though. Just try it, you big talking jerk. Hugo just coldly responds, that quick, irrational, snappy back at me is proof I was right on the spot. Isagi just glares at him though. Hugo continues, and also, your team is a serious Isagi Yoichi dependency. We then see Isagi in the center of Bluelock with chains attached to him from every direction. As Hugo continues to clock his tea, the Japanese team is currently growing on the premise of your endless new ideas. In other words, paradoxically, you're not allowed to stop thinking and evolving. If you stop growing, the team will collapse. That heavy pressure is creating impatience within you. That makes your plays easy to predict and easy to crush. Besides, at the point where you're feeling the pressure in the situation, you're not fit to be #1. And as Isagi begins to sink, Hugo continues, because if you were the #1, you should be able to joyfully enjoy this moment where you're the center of the world. Shouldn't you? As we see Isagi think back to him stressing out about being #1 in the bathroom. Hugo then points over to Loki. In that regard, our Loki is the perfect fit, born with the world's best physical abilities and never doubting he will become the world's best striker. His mind and body are in perfect sync with his aptitude. He is a natural born #1, and I'm going to produce that. I see a view that couldn't be reached alone. I want to become the world's #2. This surprises Isagi. Huh? But Hugo continues, you of all people should understand, Isagi Yoichi. I'm talking about overseeing and manipulating the organization from the second highest spot, being the one who understands the #1 better than anyone else, an equal being. Now with his ego beginning to flare, he says, Come and be the number 2, Isagi Yoichi. If you live out your destiny as the number 2, Bluelock can still become stronger. He stares at Isagi with his soulless eyes. This really scares Isagi. Hugo continues though, but if you keep chasing the dream of becoming the world's number 1 striker, Bluelock will be destroyed right here. As we see Rin's match up with Loki again, Karasu watching on in horror, and Bachara winding up to take the corner. You can probably tell from the video length, I didn't just cover the officials. I literally can't shut the fuck up, man. So these are going to be the couple of things that I want to go over. These aren't going to be in any sort of order, so just keep that in mind. But the first thing that I want to talk about is Hugo's whole speech about observing the organization from the second place. Because I do think that this starts to dive into, obviously, ego types and what each ego type is actually capable of. For talented learners, maybe that second place is the objective best place to be as a talented learner. Because now we need to dive back to other characters like Mark Snuffy, for example. Mark Snuffy has a duo, I forgot what he's called. Mike Moon? Anyway, those two played together, but it's assumed that obviously Mike Moon was the one that was scoring the goals. The person that was in charge of the team and the structure and the systems and the formations that they're using, that was all down to Snuffy, presumably. Anyway, but this is also kind of confirmed information because he's called the Crown Messenger. Any team you put him on, he's going to make that team win the league somehow. And that's because he's kind of in this position of just overseeing the organization from the second place. It's just in this case, maybe he's forced to play in the first place because obviously Mick Moon isn't there. That obviously then explains Mark Snuffy's mental decline, because then that takes into account, all right, if a person who's a talented learner is in that first place or is forced to be in that first place, does it actually work for them? And in Mark Snuffy's case, we've seen that it doesn't. And we're talking about the best player in the world objectively. Yes, he is still considered the best player in the world, but he's not the best striker. He is a good striker, he's a great striker, but he's not the best. I think this question is ultimately going to be asked to characters like Reo and obviously Isagi now, because for characters like this, being in that first place isn't good for them. And I'm not necessarily saying that to hate, I'm saying that kind of from a logical standpoint, like Hugo is. It's kind of sad because I'm agreeing with Hugo, which means that somehow I'm ultimately going to be wrong. But in the same regard, I feel like Isagi's character as a whole up to this point has been playing as the best player on his team. First selection, who did you have on his team? Kunigami, Chigiri, Bachara. They weren't the top goal scorers, at least I don't think so, because obviously Isagi was first by the end of it. But at the same time, those characters were fit better to be strikers. That's why he used them. That's why he had the weapon that he had. He existed on that team as kind of the team's captain, overseeing the organization. Yes, he did score the most goals, so I guess this point's kind of mute. But look at how he uses Kunigami in that first selection. He uses Kunigami when he needs that missing piece. When he's faced against Barrow, he passes to Kunigami. When he's facing Nagi, he's screaming at him, "Oh, Kunigami, please, you have to shoot from there." When he's in the Bacha game, he's still relying on Kunigami to score that first goal. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We need to go, obviously, to the second selection. He teams up with Bachara and Nagi. And he himself admits that if he lost, nobody would pick him. Then goes on to be the best player on his team in the second selection, to then be picked by Rin. Because funny enough, Rin picked Bachara, and Bachara could provide more utility to the team than somebody like Nagi, who's a better striker. So even though that match was obviously a Rin-Isagi rivalry thing, Nagi was technically right there, and so was Barrow, because he didn't even understand Barrow. But Rin chooses the best player, not the best striker. Hence why he chooses Bachara, hence why he chooses Isagi. That's a hypothetical, though. Anyway, we're taking really long tangents, and I'm also sorry if I'm explaining absolutely everything now. I just figured since I'm on YouTube, why limit myself, you know? Explain the entire fucking thing instead of just saying, there. So then, third selection. Isagi plays in the third selection. He scores, but he's not the best striker. U20 game. He scores, he's the best player, he's not the best striker. NEL. He scores, he's objectively the best player, he's not the best striker. Rin's still tied with him, and Kaiser beat him. Isagi's always been in this second place. And this is where it comes down to that 1% luck. Because just think about how each arc was set up. I'm not saying the ego intentionally made it benefit Isagi. It's just lucky that Isagi was the perfect fit for Ego's idea. So this 1% luck that Hugo's talking about, and even technically what Isagi's made up until this point, they've all been created in a system that's built to reduce. And that's why I think we get Ego on this final panel. There are 2 reasons, but we'll just go over this one first. But I just want to say, I'm not trying to shit talk Ego considering what he was given in the first place and what he's able to make out of that. The ultimate question in football is, what is the cause of you getting stronger? And Ego himself says the environment. Well, this environment, but I cut this for another reason. When you look at Bluelock's structure, it's in a reductive phase. Every arc's built on eliminating players, eliminating people that don't have the ego or don't have the skill. I mean, just look at the NEL, right? He made each character pick a league that fit that character's playstyle and made them play in a tournament against each other. But the ultimate problem about this environment is that he's on a timer and he's in a country where he can't add more talent in. Because when you think about Japanese players, you don't really have more options outside of Bluelock now. Because you've also got to remember, they've only been like influential for like 100 days. Well, I guess maybe a year at this point. But they've not been around long enough to fundamentally change Japan yet, because they've not even won the World Cup. What I'm basically talking about is that Ego was given a set amount of resources and just had to make do. Instead of having the NEL without rules and just be a 90-minute match, and then actually have the transfers go through too, and then play on those teams for maybe a month or 2, and then go into the World Cup, they would be a much better team, obviously. But that's not been the case for Bluelock. They've always been on a timer. It's always been, oh, we've got this amount of time before we need to win the World Cup. The 1% luck that Hugo's talking about is simply Isagi fitting the system of Bluelock, and that system benefiting him in that time. But because the system of Bluelock is built around a very specific ego type, there hasn't really been enough time for the other characters in Bluelock to actually properly develop. Because everything so far has been centered around Ego finding that one egoist that can find God. Because I think that also then explains why he was telling Isagi about God and goal formulas and everything like that just being something he created. Well, not God, but goal formulas, chemical reactions, flow state, all of that is just built off Ego's current understanding of what God is. Ego's kind of initial journey in Bluelock is to find that host that can then eventually host whatever he believes in. That's why the first selection was made the way that it was. That's why he's making a speech about something that happened to Isagi. It could be coincidence. Because he's looking for a host. Isagi being that host is just a coincidence. I know I'm starting to veer pretty far from the path that I initially started, but this is where it comes back on itself. Bluelock as a system was built on finding a host first. Isagi being that host is lucky, because the system that takes him from the first selection to the U20 World Cup is built on reduction, meaning that Isagi's going to climb higher and experience better versions of geniuses. He has Chigiri on his team, and then Chigiri gets downscaled for a second by Zantetsu. And Zantetsu's still useful, by the way, but he runs into characters like Nagi, Reo, Baro, Nico, all in the first selection. Then in the second selection, he runs into stronger geniuses, Rin, Aryu, Tokimitsu. At the time, he was really strong. But then in the third selection, he runs into more strong characters, Hiyori, Shido. Then in the U20 game, he's using all of the best geniuses in Bluelock now. By geniuses, I mean so genius level. But again, even in the U20 game, he meets a higher ceiling, who's going to be an ally on his team eventually anyway. So up until the U20 team, he's just been finding better and better pieces. You then go over to the NEL. And in the NEL, he's kind of given better pieces because he's got Ness. But at the end of the PXG game, he's also got Kaiser. This is Isagi having access to better geniuses, or better talent. This entire time, Isagi's been more so climbing up something. And this is where we start to get into the harsh reality of being a talented learner. If there is a system for you to climb, you are going to be objectively really good. But when it comes to being at the pinnacle of said system, I don't think it actually technically works. And that's why I'm yapping about Snuffy. Snuffy works well climbing the ladder, but he can't be at the pinnacle because then he just becomes the best player. But to summarize this yap session before I start to yap way too fucking much, the summary is this. Bluelock has existed to find a host that can then host God. Isagi being the host is lucky. Isagi's development in Bluelock up until the World Cup has been him finding access to better pieces to use. Now that he's reached the pinnacle and he's the best piece, there are no better pieces to learn from, there are no better pieces to use. Now he's at the center, he is responsible for the new ideas. That's why we see Isagi in the center here with all these chains around him. Because now there are no better pieces around for him to develop off or use or to fit in this certain slot. It's just him. Just him. Well, there is Rin. But at this point in time, Shido's technically not in this conversation universe-wise. Barrow's not in this conversation universe-wise. And funny enough, neither's Nagi. And they're the top 5 strikers. So until those people become equal to, if not better than Isagi in some way, Bluelock's always going to be centered around him, and that's bad for a talented learner. A talented learner needs puzzle pieces to use. That's why we see Mark Snuffy, the best player in the world, rely on Mick Moon to score the goals. That's why we then see this, mental decline up until Barrow, forces him out of it. Because the mentality that he has of being the striker, of being the one that scores the goals, isn't a good thing for him. Because Ubers become stale very quickly. Stale in the sense of your evolutions are limited. You can only do this certain thing because this character needs you to do that certain thing. New ideas, new expressions, new weapons are not considered valuable or worth taking the risk. It's better for Chigiri to just be a sprinter that crosses the ball in. Because running the risk of him playing on the left side, not crossing the ball in, and missing the Panther Snipe spot, it's not valuable now. But whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, a talented learner being at the top, I don't think works. But I feel like Hugo yapping about all of this, even though he might be wrong inevitably in some way, is the catalyst of Isagi understanding this information. Isagi works better in a place where he's got stronger people around him, and it's up to him to figure them out. When the system's then flipped, and it's not throwing out older, weaker pieces for newer, stronger pieces, the ideas start to stop. Because looking at it from a talented learner perspective, the one thing that you're good at is the one thing that they need you to do. This might ultimately end up with Isagi being a trigger for Chigiri in this game, funny enough. Because Isagi might only see Chigiri now as a speedster that can cross the ball in. Or a speedster that can tackle Loki. Because he's got that very skewed or very tunnel-visioned way of thinking about Chigiri's character, that ends up with his utilization being wrong and Chigiri getting injured, potentially. But we are beginning to yap. Basically, being a number 1 as a talented learner, as a striker, might not work because we literally saw it not work with Snuffy. I think Isagi's story the entire time has been about him becoming the best player other than the best striker. Because the other thing in Bluelock is that strikers aren't limited to the position of striker. Him being the best player in the world then also means that he is the best striker in the world, mentality-wise. Because to get there, you've got to have the ego, right? But I think that's it. I'm sorry if this is a bit fucky because this is my first time making a YouTube video properly. And funny enough, all the editing styles that I used in the fucking first part, I learned from the Yukimiya video. I'm just warning you now, the quality of that video is so fucky, it starts off pretty bad and then progressively gets better. In the video. Actually, one more thing that I do want to add with this little fucking officials yap session is that Kaiser might be the only talented learner we get that can be the number 1 striker. Because when you look at Kaiser's character, he's got a weapon that other talented learners don't have. He's got a genius gene. Not only that, but he's literally called God's Chosen. So this idea that Kaiser could be the number 1 striker as a talented learner and doesn't need to go down to the 2nd position all plays into his name, his weapon, his character. Because Kaiser might be this new standard for the world where talented learners do have a genius weapon, but they are mentally still talented learners. Like, for example, Kaiser having the fastest swing speed, but not being considered a genius. That might bring a new standard to the world of talented learners having genius weapons. It doesn't change their ego type, it changes their playstyle. Because you can, again, see that in Kaiser. Kaiser has Kaiser Impact X Metavision. Obviously, you could slap Metavision on any fucking character with a genius weapon and they'd objectively be better. But I think talented learners are going to gain weapons that don't have an inherent benefit over other weapons. Like swing speed, for example. Kaiser's got the fastest swing speed. It does not mean his shot's the most accurate. It does not mean his shot's the fastest. technically, because his swing speed's the fastest. His shot might be the fastest we've seen in the series so far, but it's not been called the most powerful. He's a speedster, but he's not the fastest speedster. So when you think about Kaiser's character, you're kind of thinking about what Isagi was describing in that Ubers game. Kaiser's kind of got a sub-weapon, which is the Kaiser Impact. That's the little secondary weapon he has. Because that's also what Hugo's yapping about right here. Talent, 66%. Kaiser's obviously very talented. Metavision, Predator Eye, good at reading the field, good at positioning. Environment, 33%. That's where I feel like the Kaiser Impact comes from, and the fact that he evolves after Isagi joins Bastard Munchin. It's an environment that's restricting him, so he evolved and got a new weapon, or mentality. So the Kaiser Impact is in this environment side, because if he wasn't in that environment that he was in when he was younger, he wouldn't have the Kaiser Impact. And it's also, obviously, Isagi teaming up with him in the PhD game. And this is where it gets a little bit fucky, but it does make sense. The 1% look is Kaiser being born with the genes to get the Kaiser Impact. I know that I just said that it's part of his environment that gives him the Kaiser Impact, but at the same time, if he doesn't have the genetic structure to do it, I don't think he actually ever gets the Kaiser Impact. Like, I think if you do put every character in Bluelock so far in the same situation that Kaiser's been in, I think there's only really a 1% chance that you actually get a character that comes out with the Kaiser Impact. But that one's a bit more hypothetical. You can see this 1% look as Kaiser being scouted by Ray Dark. Kaiser running into Ness being obsessed with him. Him running into Isagi not being a small fry and pushing him to evolve and face the reality of his mentality. And finally, Kaiser's fucking name, God's Chosen Emperor. Every part of Kaiser's character feels like it's been meticulously crafted to specifically make the best talented learner striker in the world. You can't just be a talented learner, so he's got the Kaiser Impact, he's got a bit of genius genes there. You can't be in an environment that coddles you or is too restrictive. Because, for example, Ness gave Kaiser too much freedom, so he stopped evolving. And Kaiser was surrounded by people who he could just fucking no-diff, apparently, so he wasn't being pushed to evolve. And then the talent side is obviously Kaiser getting Predator Eye, Metavision. I want to say in the future he's going to score a Reflex X Reflex goal, and I also want to say that he's got a new curve shot now, but they're theoretical. But the basic premise is this. Isagi's story so far has been him becoming the best player in the world, because he's always been using better and better pieces as he climbs up the ranks. Kaiser, on the other side, could be a talented learner that is the best striker in the world just because of the Kaiser Impact. It's something he has that other people don't have that then pushes him above them. But I think that's actually everything that I wanted to say about this. So thanks for indulging my bullshit as always. Never stop updating your world's perspective. Drink water, look after yourself. Peace. Like in the video. But I think that's everything that I've wanted to yap about for now. Or at least in this video. So thanks for indulging my bullshit as always. Never stop updating your world's perspective. Drink water, look after yourself. Peace.